Alright guys, this is John with Louisiana Tractor Works and Projects, and today's video we got a little something special for y'all. We're at one of our biggest suppliers for plants. It's called Greengate. It is in Lake Charles, Louisiana, and though they got hurricane damage in that, they have done an astounding job of getting their place back up and running in order to supply plants for contractors like us. And so we wanted to come out here and with my oldest son Curry, and we wanted to talk about the plants that they have and that and what they do over here and different things about that area. But we wanted to really show y'all, you know, how much effort these guys are making, even though they have so much damage in that done. But if you see the greenhouse behind me, they just got this thing completed a few weeks ago, maybe a month and a half ago. Yeah, it was totally gone. I mean, all the glass was gone out of it. So they really are working hard, and they're really working hard on getting plants in. Ever since the freeze, it has been really hard to get our hands on plants, and these guys have been doing an outstanding job of it, and that's why we kind of want to give them props for that, because very few other suppliers are able to get what these guys have been able to get for us. So yeah, we're going to do some talking about some plants, some zones, planning, all kinds of different stuff. We're just gonna go over a bunch of different information for y'all and hopefully help y'all get yourself situated where you can do your DIY landscaping at home yourself.
Alright, so we're out here at Greengate Gardens, and we started out with the Angelonas over here. Angelonas are one of my favorite plants. They're part of the snapdragon family, and they're more of a high tier plant. You put them up, they grow typically 12 to 16 inches tall. And you get a variety of colors. You start out with these whites here, you can get into purples, and as you can see back here, there's a lighter pinkish purple. And the best part about them is you put those behind your annuals, and it just gives it a fullness. As you can see, just one of these plants, that's a 6-inch and maybe even smaller, but it fills up quite a gap for one plant. And these are pretty available all throughout spring, summer, fall here. Typically you don't take them above zone 8, but I've heard of them lasting in zone 8 and even higher than that. Snapdragons tend to be able to go up into zone 7 and 6 every once in a while. They're a cold season plant here. We replaced the Angelonas with the Snapdragons, and that's the thing with annuals, you have to expect that it's only going to last a single season. Okay. So when you're planting your annuals, which a lot of people love because they're full of color, you got to only expect that it's going to make it one season, and every other season past that's bonus time.
Okay, so, and the difference between annuals, because there's a lot of questions about the difference between what is annuals and what is perennial. So what is the actual definition between the two?
So an annual is only going to come out in full bloom once a year, to where a perennial is going to come out in full bloom every single year for usually a season, maybe 2. But that's the biggest difference is perennials you don't have to replant over and over. Annuals you expect to have to replant seasonally.
Okay.
Here we have some foliage plants that I've always been a fan of. These are all coleuses right here, and you get a variety of different colors in your coleuses. You got the light green with the burgundy in shade. You got more burgundy like here. Different leaf structures, different leaf sizes. I mean, these are both coleuses, and you can just see the difference between one leaf to the next, size and shape wise. And then you get further down and you have other ones like this that are basically the opposite of that. And they're constantly breeding new varieties of coleus and caladiums. So just because the color that they don't have one year, there might have been a new breeder that brought out that same color the next year. Your most popular ones are the burgundy, just because you don't have a lot of burgundy flowers. So there's a lot of different shades of burgundy. Back here you can kind of see this rust shade. But yeah, I've always been a fan of them because while they're technically annuals, I've seen people cut them back and they come back.
In Louisiana,
right, right, yeah, and that's another thing. I wouldn't bring these above zone 9 if possible. Possibly zone 8, but don't quote me on that. So back here we have all of your caladiums. Caladiums are a generational favorite. Your older generation seems to love them, and your younger generation seems to love them. It's kind of comes in and out, but right now they're in. So the biggest difference between your plants is you have your strap leaves and your fancy leaves. Your strap leaves are going to be a shade tolerant variety, to where your fancy leaf is going to be a full sun tolerant plant. And so the biggest difference is your strap leaves are typically going to be a little bit smaller, similar to this, and they're going to have more of a lance head. So if you can get that, how it comes to a true point, and it's basically like a spearhead. To where on your broadleaf or fancy leaf, this is a good one, and there's another one over there I want to show. It's going to be almost the shape of a heart. And so that's how you can tell. So this one would typically do well out in sun, to where this one's going to do better out in shade. And then you can see there's a ton of variety in different colorations and things like that, even on the same plant. I mean, you take these two leaves here, you have this leaf has a lot of pink, this leaf has less pink. So,
a lot of variation.
Right, a lot of variation on these plants. And a lot of people will plant multiple varieties all close to each other because these are bulb plants, all grown from bulbs. So this is another broadleaf here, a fancy leaf, and you can just see the difference as compared to something like this. I mean, you got the white and the veins stay red, as to where here you got red veins that streak out into the green. So you can bring a lot of different colors out.
And this one's green on white.
Right. Yeah, you might have one that has no red at all on it.
So that is real. So you can do a lot with the same type plants,
right?
With coloring.
And then the other thing is that some of them only grow to be this big. Take this one for instance. This might be the biggest leaf that it'll produce, and as tall as they get, to where you get this one here, and you get a foot and a half tall plant.
Big old leaves.
Right. So just the leaf itself's almost a foot. And then you got your begonias. Begonias, very leathery leaf. They prefer shade most of the time. They produce these flowers, typically more than this once you get them in the ground or in a bigger pot. But they prefer the shade, so they're really good about bringing flowers into the shade, which is something typically that's kind of hard to find down here. More or less, it's often foliage plants that you find in the shade. So when you can bring out begonia, and I'll show you a few different ones a little later that have better foliage looking, you want to get something that's going to bring you flowers in your shade area. Begonia might be your choice. The one thing about begonias though is they're very easy to overwater. So
watch where you plant.
Right, they can take it dry, but they do not like being wet all the time. They'll rot out very quickly on you.
Okay. So what would, on this, what kind of irrigation, if you had a bed of these, what drip irrigation would be probably your best bet on this?
Yeah, drip irrigation is definitely
instead of sprinkler or spraying.
Right. And even though they do have the leather leaf, which is typically okay for your sprayer irrigations, your leather leaf plants tend to hold up better to being sprayed on the foliage. I would still recommend drip irrigation for any plant that's not gonna do well with a ton of water.
Okay.
And right here, this is one of my favorites. This is a Lysomachia. Golden globe is the common name, but it is a ground spreading plant, and it's just a ground cover. But I've planted quite a bit of these, and as far as a yellow plant that just covers the ground, you don't get much better. And I just like the fact that it'll produce this yellow flower and has a very dark leaf. There's also another variety that produces a purple leaf with the yellow flower, which in Louisiana that's very popular because LSU's purple and gold. Let's step out here into more of the bedding section. This is another ground cover plant. This is called a Blue Days. And basically, it's about as close to a blue flower as you're gonna get. They've been trying to produce blue flowers for a long time now. Problem is plants don't have the pigmentation necessary to produce a blue flower. So, maybe at some point they will through breeding and experimentation, but as of right now, this is about as close as you'll get. So this is what people go for their blue shades. A lot of times what they'll do is people will put blue pots out in their gardens or in their landscapes, and that'll bring out the blue for them. Another type of ground cover is verbena. It's about as hardy as it gets. Goes up to about zone 6 to zone 7 and produces these purple flowers here. The good thing about verbena is they can be trampled on, they can be stepped on, they can be chopped up, and they'll almost always come back.
So if you got kids, that's a good plant to have.
Right.
That's running around the yard.
Right. And down here, once again, we count this as a perennial because it almost always comes back.
Okay.
Now, this is probably my favorite bedding plant at Greengate, just because it's an orange flower and they're very rare to find.
Yeah, it looks like
orange
sherbet.
flowers. Right. This is Chrysandra, and typically they'll grow about that tall and produce much larger flowers than this. They'll probably get about that big, about twice the size of these flowers, and it just brings out a different color into your landscape if you can fit it in. I always try to put in some Chrysandras, especially in a tropical landscape, because orange looks good in tropical landscapes.
In real life, it is much more orange than what you're seeing in the camera. What I'm seeing in the camera is almost a kind of a yellowish orange, but if you see these in real life, you really want to look at these. These literally look like sherbet ice cream orange.
Yes.
They're beautiful.
Then right here we got some more ground covers. These are all potato vines, and you got two different varieties typically. You got your lime green and you got your purple. These things over here can go crazy in your yard. You can put 5 or 6 of these in your landscape and they will make up the entire landscape.
They take over that much.
They will take over that much. You want to keep them cut back if you want to keep them trimmed and stuff and have other flowers, but if you just want something to throw in your yard or throw in your landscape and fill it up, then this will do it.
Well, that's what I was fixing to ask. Is it so bad that they choke out other plants?
Oh yeah, they'll choke out just about anything.
So you really got to stay on top of it.
Yeah, and not even just choke out. They won't allow the roots to get water. Just the fact of how thick the leaves will get, the water will run off and never make it down to the ground.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Right. Here's something that a lot of people can use just about everywhere. This is a blanket flower, and this is a pretty good looking one right here. Blanket flowers can be used all the way up to zone 2. So, I'm not exactly certain where zone 2 is, but I believe it's closer to the Minnesota-Montana range.
Okay.
Possibly South Dakota. But, they'll end up growing about 1 foot tall, and so it's a good mid-range to high plant to grow. And it's got these yellow daisy-like flowers with big heads on them. It's also a very good pollinator plant for bees and butterflies and stuff like that, because it's very open and accessible to bees and butterflies.
So a lot of insect life is drawn to it.
Right.
So if you guys like the butterflies and that, and the bees and that, yeah, that would be a good choice.
Right, and down here, especially like monarch butterflies, their populations are dwindling very badly. Mainly because of deforestation and stuff like that, but a lot of the reason is because milkweed is the only thing that the juveniles at the caterpillar stage eat. And so if there's not enough milkweed, well then they can't ever turn from a caterpillar to butterfly. That life cycle stops at caterpillar.
Yeah.
So, which if it stops at caterpillar, they never lay eggs, so the next generation's gone. But pollinator gardens, that's getting big because of the fact that things like monarchs and swallowtails are starting to dwindle a lot down here, and if you don't have pollinators, you don't have plants, period. Around to these.
Are these the same as this one, just different color?
So, blanket flowers, echinacea.
Okay, so they all actually are different.
Right.
But they got the big pollinating heads, big open heads on them.
Right, good pollinator plant.
Okay.
Up here you have periwinkles or vinca, depending on who you're talking to. You have 2 different types. You have your upright vinca and you have your trailing vinca. These, as you can tell, are definitely trailing vinca, and they will trail. Down here is a very good looking one, showing you how well they can trail. A lot of people like putting them in hanging pots, but you can put them on the ground and they'll last.
Okay, so when you mean trail, you mean they grow across the ground?
Right.
Okay.
They'll run across the ground. They're a crawling plant.
Okay.
And you got quite a variety of colors. As you can see, starting down there, you got the darker pinkish purple down to almost a pinkish red to a white. Polka dot in the center with the white. And then you have like this cream apricot-like color. And that's not even all. There's a lot more colors of vinca.
What is these?
These are shrimp plants. Now,
shrimp plants.
Right, and it's just basically because of the way that flower looks, like a shrimp.
It does.
And they come in red, white, and yellow. Right now, all they seem to have is the yellow. But typically, these will only do well in Louisiana and further south. But they are a tall growing plant, so if you live in the south and want something that's going to grow tall and may come back, may not, but shrimp plants is a good choice, especially if you can get multiple colors in there.
Yeah, because I see this one's getting a different colored leaf on there.
Right. This is they call it a fruit cocktail, which the picture has a little better showing of what the actual flowers would look like. And this right here is a milkweed. We actually have a few different milkweeds here. Here's some smaller versions that just haven't got as tall yet. And this is what I was talking about. Butterflies need this to survive, especially the monarchs. They're not usually able to keep these for long periods of time because people with pollinator gardens will come in and buy 10 or 12 flats at once. Another good thing that milkweed's also good for is trap plants. If you have problems with aphids and stuff, you can plant these in the back corner or somewhere like that. The aphids will all go to these milkweeds before they'll go to anything else. So you use those as trap plants, and then you can just come and spray the aphids off with water or something like that, and most of them's gonna die.
So let's talk about some of the pond plants, because you know, traditionally Gulf Coast area and that, and along the South, everywhere, people love having ponds. And a lot of people just don't know exactly what plants will work really good in their ponds.
Right, so let's start with this one. This is one of my favorites. This is a pitcher plant, and it's actually a carnivorous plant. It means it eats bugs. So what will happen is a fly or any type of bug will fly into one of these openings, and then this opening will close down on them, similar to a Venus flytrap, and they get stuck in there, and the plant just slowly eats it over time. Right. And it can work in your pond. You don't want to submerge it fully, but if you have like a shallow area that you want to fill up about that high, you can definitely put this down in there, and it'll cut down on your bugs significantly. In the pond.
And let me ask you, so if you do have a little bit deeper though, you could set like a cinder block or something like that in there.
If you look down right here, that's actually how they did it here. They put a piece of flagstone with a block underneath it, so it would be at the height that the plant needs to survive. And as you can see, a lot of times your fish, we put some goldfish in here a long time ago. They've been breeding ever since. But they'll just sit there and eat off of the dead roots and sometimes the living roots, but they'll keep your plants healthy. And then you got your water lilies and stuff like that, which none of them are in bloom at the moment. These are water lilies here. None of them are in bloom at the moment, but when they bloom, there's probably not a flower that looks better than a water lily flower. They can kind of be on the expensive side, but at the same time, it's because of that single flower, or sometimes you'll get 2 or 3, but usually a single flower, and it'll become the focal point of your entire pond. So you get 10 or 12 of those, and you'll have a nice looking pond, and they spread. That's the other thing. One of these will break off, and as you can see, they don't even have it in pots anymore. Yeah, you can just pull it up, right? You just let them float, and that's how we used to break them off and sell them. And you plant that, throw that back in the water, and it'll take off, and next thing you know, you got 10 or 12. So here's another plant that I like, celosia. And they really grow very feathery-like flowers, in all different kinds of colors. They got purples and reds and yellows. Right now they just have the yellow and red, but they have all different kinds of colors. But the flower wise, it's not typical that you even find something that looks like this, kind of like a cattail. But down here we like to use them, especially in people that have like landscapes that's kind of focused around Mardi Gras. We like to get the purples and yellows and make it look like feathers, like the Mardi Gras feathers coming out of the mask. They'll grow about that tall, and these heads can get quite large. I've seen them as tall as that big just on the head of the flower. So impatiens, shade plant, also produces flowers. I wish they had, oh, actually this is an impatient right here. So that's kind of like the flowers that they produce. It's very similar to the periwinkle flower.
Very pretty. Right,
to where periwinkles grow typically full sun, these grow in full shade. There's not a ton of flowers. This about covers your flowering section of full shade plants, right. You got your Tyrannias, which they do have quite a few different colors of Tyrannias. You got this light white with yellow, you have this light purple. Back here there's a darker purple, and there's a lot of mix that happens. If you can see back over there, there's some purple and white. Yeah. That kind of mix in with each other. These things are a very good ground cover as well. They grow up very thick. They tend to only last the season though, so you plant them for the season, they grow up really quick, they grow really fast and fill up, but then at the end of the season they're going to be dead most likely. The summer here is devastating for them.
Okay, but there are a full shade plant.
Right, but even in the full shade,
yeah,
the heat, the temperature itself, not
our
just
heat
the sun.
is unreal coming towards the mid and end of summer.
Now these are the ones I was talking about, the different varieties of begonias from over there. Once again, the very leathery leaf plants. They prefer light watering, not heavy watering. But you can see the difference in the colors of the flower. This is a double bloom right here, double blossom. And you can just kind of see how it's just a fuller flower than the single blossom here. But these are very popular with shade gardens, especially just because of the variety of colors you can get. A lot of people will mix the or the impatiens with the begonia and throw in some coleus or some caladiums, and then you'll have a fully colored shade garden. These here are lantana. They come in about 15 different colors, all kinds of colors that you can't even imagine. And a lot of times they'll have multiple colors on the same blossoms. So the thing with these is, if you live in below zone 7, especially zone 8 and higher, they're almost impossible to kill. They'll die back here and there, but most of the time they're just going to come back. You can try, I've seen people spray them with poisons to try to get them out of their gardens, and these things will not die. So if you kill plants on a regular basis, then this is probably a plant for you.
So in other words, if you ain't so good with the green thumb like I ain't, this is probably what would be best for me to plant.
Right. And then one more is just these zinnias here. These zinnias can grow all the way up as north as far as like the very northwest United States, northwest Pacific. Zinnias come in a variety of colors. That's a zinnia over there with the red. These are zinnias with the yellow, orange. You got double blossoms, single blossoms.
So they come in a wide variety.
Wide variety, and can be grown all over the United States and upwards into Canada.
So this is one of them plants that really don't matter where you're at. You can plant this thing and it will grow for you.
Right. And typically your nursery is going to have the variety that's selected for your area, but you can still take this plant probably up to zone 4, and this exact plant will survive.
Very good.
But they do have varieties.
Now
this is a whole other variety right there, the pink and yellow. That's really pretty.
That is. Now, and then there's not a whole lot of plants that can go clean across the zones.
No, not at all. All right, so over here we're getting into the bushes, hedges, and trees. These are the D.D. Blanchard magnolias. The coolest part about these magnolias, you can't feel it because you're not here, but if you feel on the back side of these magnolia leaves, it's very cushiony, almost like a teddy bear, felt-like.
Velvet feeling.
Right. And so that's a really cool part, and you can see this one's actually about to start blossoming. That's its cone right there. These cones open up and turn into gigantic magnolia flowers.
And these are some big ones right here.
Yeah, these are big for what they normally get, and I can tell these are definitely special ordered for somebody.
Yeah, these are beautiful.
Right. And this is the state tree of Louisiana, so they get a lot of these here. These are all actually magnolias here as well, just smaller varieties, different varieties. But these are all still get very big. There's only 1 or 2 varieties that stay what they would call dwarf, but dwarf for a magnolia is about 15 feet tall. So these D.D. Blanchards would probably get upwards of 70, 80 feet within a decade or so. Right here we got a bunch of foxtails. Personally, I've never been a fan just because cleaning them is kind of difficult. What will tend to happen is your new growth will grow out, die back, and you'll have a kind of a bald spot in the middle there that you got to kind of pull out and allow the other ones to fill up. But these are very popular because they're very maintenance free besides that, and if you don't want to pull it out, you don't have to. Eventually the other ones will overtake it. You'll just have an ugly spot for a month or 2.
Now I got some of these, and the reason I got them is because the way they grow, I put them on a levee to hold the integrity of the levee, because the root system, the way it grows.
Right. The root structure of this plant tends to stay very wide and not go but about 6 inches deep into the ground. Maybe a little bit bigger as they get larger, but it's a tubular plant, so let's see if I can pull one out here. Show y'all what I'm talking about, if possible. You see all these will all produce new foxtail shoots, right? So they'll grow out, 6-7 feet away, and next thing you know, you got a foxtail popping up 7 feet away. But they have good structural integrity, so if erosion's a problem, especially around your pond, I wouldn't recommend planting them around salt water because they're not very salt tolerant. But around a freshwater pond, if you're losing your dirt into the pond, this is a good thing to plant around the edges. And
or if you got
dirt
somewhere there's a lot of moving water.
Right, ditches and stuff like that especially. You have the Japanese yews, which I've always liked as a shade plant just because they're very easy to maintain and I think they look cool. So they stay very low to the ground, but they grow very wide, which is very different from the common yew that a lot of people are familiar with that can grow 20 feet tall. These tend to grow 20 feet wide. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but 8 foot is not an exaggeration. It might be 8 foot from outleaf to outleaf.
So instead of growing up, they grow out.
Right. So it's a good ground cover plant, especially for shade, with a pretty cool leaf structure as well. I've always liked them. So if anybody ever wants something that's not going to produce a lot of flowers, that some people are just more fan of greens, that's a good plant to go with. These here are hostas. There's all kinds, hundreds of varieties of hostas. And basically, this is what you get, and it produces a gigantic stalk that produces flowers out of it. Right now, they're not flowering, but a few weeks ago they were. So this is the second batch coming out now. But just the variegation from this hosta to this hosta, you can kind of see the difference in the plants,
and the leaf texture in that. And
it changes much more abruptly than that with the hostas. They just aren't able to keep them very long because people love hostas for their shade tolerance.
Okay, now speaking of, since we're talking about that, since the freeze and that has devastated most of the plant farmers and that, how hard is it for these guys to get plants and lead times kind of?
Oh, lead times can be upwards of 6 months at the moment. There's plants, I just had to order a Photinia, which I wouldn't recommend growing in zone 9, but I had a customer that really wanted a Photinia, which is a red tip Photinia. And it took her about 3.5 months for me to get that plant in. We had finished the landscape. I had to leave a spot open for it. And now I'm about to go plant that Photinia because it just came in recently. But that's typically what if it's not a common plant like a hosta or a foxtail or a liriope, which we'll get to a little bit later, it's probably going to take a while.
Now, the ice storm, it wasn't that it was an ice storm that really devastated the plant industry. It was the timing of that ice storm when it hit.
Right. So at the timing of the ice storm, everything was going into its spring session. So everything had a ton of new growth, which it typically only does once a year in the spring. So whenever that happened and it froze, all those plants had all their new growth for the year already there. So the freeze came, froze all that new growth, and just either stagnated or flat out killed those plants. Because that's when they're at their most vulnerable, is when they're putting out new growth. So some of them are coming back, but a lot of the times they just died and have to start completely over, and that set everything back basically a year.
Yeah, and I know a lot of the growers and that that grew, they lost everything. All their plants died off, and they were speedily trying to reseed and replant, you know, bulbs and that to get something out on there before summer actually hit.
Right, and what a lot of people don't realize is over here between us and Florida, there's a lot of regulations of bringing plants from Florida to here and vice versa, because we have insects over here that devastate Florida plants, and they have insects over there that devastate nematodes especially, that devastate our plants just because they've never ran across it before. It's kind of like if you've never had the cold before and somebody comes and gives you the cold. That's basically what happens whenever we cross plants like that. Texas also has a ton of regulations about sending plants to Louisiana and vice versa there. So whenever the ice storm happened, there wasn't really an outlet to bring in new plants unless you were able to check all these boxes of the regulations, and nobody was prepared to do that.
Yeah,
at the time.
Because it really never was done.
Never needed to.
Yes.
Since the ice storm that happened in the 90s.
Yes.
So here we have some jasmine. This is another ground cover plant. The best thing about these is they grow like crazy. We'll probably be able to make it over to that side over there, and I can show you what it looks like in full bloom. But the best thing about these is you can set them out. Now they will take over, but at the same time, they're so hardy, you can take a weed eater to it and trim around and make it the exact size and area that you want it to.
And it will still keep growing.
It'll keep on growing.
Don't shock it.
Right, so all this new red stuff is new growth. It'll eventually turn into this white variegated, well, yellow variegated leaf, but all this red is all nothing but new growth. And you can kind of see it all the way throughout.
Now, is this the jasmine that gives off the scent that everybody...
No.
Okay.
No, this is the foliage jasmine.
Okay.
Maybe they have some Confederate jasmine over there, but this is typically the jasmine that people think of. Confederate jasmine, like the name suggests, is not a true jasmine. It looks like a jasmine, it acts like a jasmine, but it's not a jasmine.
Okay. And that's the one that gives off the scent that everybody's
looking. That's the smell that everybody's wanting.
Okay.
Over here we have Sasanquas, which is one of my favorite bushes to grow. These are the shishis, I believe. There's so many varieties, so there's no way to tell the difference by leaf structures on these. Yeah, so these are shishi Sasanquas, which means they're a dwarf. They max out at about 4.5 feet, but typically it's closer to 3 feet. There's another one, I believe it's the Yuletide, that's very similar in height and flower color. Typically they'll put the color of the flowers on the plant, so I don't actually believe that this is a shishi gashira, which is a little bit different than your typical shishi. Same height and everything, but the flower color is different. There's as many Sasanqua breeders as there are rose breeders, so you can kind of compare that as to how many different varieties of roses and colors you see. You're going to get that same amount in the Sasanquas and camellias. Okay,
so there's a pretty much unlimited variety that you can play with.
Right. And there's two different varieties. You have your Sasanqua camellias, and then you have your Sasanqua japonicas. Your Sasanqua japonicas tend to grow in the shade a lot better. These can grow in the shade or in the sun. It doesn't matter.
So it's one of them plants that you can really plant anywhere.
Right. You just want to establish it where you want it to go. That's the main thing. If you can establish it in the full sun, then it's going to be able to grow in the full sun forever. If you establish it in full shade or mostly shade, then it's going to grow in mostly shade forever.
So don't transplant it once it's established.
Right. Right, you want to keep it where it's at. Actually, we just transplanted one that was in full sun, but we transplanted it back to full sun. So it should take off, the one that we transplanted.
Yep. So in other words, full sun to full sun's good, shade to shade's good, but don't go shade to full sun or full sun to shade.
It's going to die. Within a week or so, it's going to die. Most likely. Let's see, this is a different variety obviously here. This is the Yuletide I was talking about earlier. So it's going to produce a red type flower, and it gets about 4.5 to 5 feet tall as well, I believe. But the red is a very dark red Yuletide, meaning like Christmas, so it's going to produce a very red Christmassy like color. The best thing about Sasanquas though is they typically put off a set of blooms in the winter. So when everything dies and looks dead, these are first thing are evergreens, so they won't look dead, and secondary, they'll be producing flowers in the winter. So,
which is uncommon for most plants.
Right, and these are grown all over the United States as well.
So these are, but they have preferences for zoning?
Right, they do have preferences. Like a shishi might not be able to grow in Montana, but they do have a Sasanqua or camellia variety that can grow in Montana. Okay,
so look for the brand, the one that matches your zone.
Right, and let's just see what kind of variety they have over here. Stephanie Golden, this is another one I like. It gets to be a lot taller. I say a lot taller, about 7 feet tall, but it produces a pinkish flower with a yellow inlet. So it looks very good, and it's also another good pollinator plant because that inlet's so big, bees are able to access it very easily. So there's a lot of room to play with the Sasanquas. You can have 4 or 5
like
different
roses.
Sasanquas right in your garden or in your landscape. And, you know, to the naked eye, most people won't even know that it's the same plant or in the same family. They'll think it's totally different plants because it produces totally different color flowers, totally different sizes. Here we have azaleas, a very native plant to Louisiana and all the South, probably as north as Georgia and the Carolinas. But once again, this is a plant that's got a ton of different varieties. A ton of different growers, not worldwide, but nationwide for sure. And basically it's a plant it and forget about it plant. They don't take much maintenance, very low maintenance. I mean, you can make them as high, you can make any plant as high maintenance as you want by trimming and stuff like that, but you can set this out and forget about it if you really want. And it'll stay its typical size. All of these over here, also azaleas.
So there is a lot of varieties.
Right. And these are the ones I'm a little more familiar with over on this side. Those are more shade tolerant azaleas over there, where these are going to be your full sun tolerant. Let's see if they have any formosas at the moment. George Tabor. So this is a George Tabor. I'm going to pull off because none of them's really flowering right now. But if you can see just the difference in what you would normally think of an azalea as compared to what some of these azaleas can look like when they're flowering. And this is kind of a dwarf as well. They'll probably only get about 5-6 feet tall. So more of an intermediate, to where your formosas, which I don't see any offhand, they can get as tall as 25 feet. Usually the big azalea trees that you see is probably a formosa. And then strangely enough, this is also an azalea. With these...
Wait, this is an azalea
Yeah, this
as well?
is an azalea.
Okay.
Now, the strange thing about these azaleas is they really don't produce flowers very often. They do from time to time, and it's going to be a hot pink flower. But 99% of the time, 99% of the years, it seems like it's not going to produce any flowers at all. They were bred specifically for their foliage.
So that's why they color it in the leaf.
Right. But it just goes to show you the different varieties that you can get with the same plant. Now over here is the encore azaleas. So most of your azaleas will only bloom once a year. They'll die back, the flowers will die back, and it'll take another year for it to build up that energy to put off a new bloom. So the difference between the encores is they'll breed or blossom 3 or 4 times in a year. You get them all the way up from 8-foot tall encore azaleas down to 3-foot tall encore azaleas. And from all different varieties, just like how these will have all different varieties, these also come in all different varieties of colors. This one here, it's not a very good picture because it's kind of sun spotted, but it's typically going to be a purple going into a white. Over here we have a hydrangea, which she was showing me. They just got this variety in. This is a variegated hydrangea, which is a little rare. You can kind of see the variegation along the leaf edges. And that's the thing, if anybody ever calls a plant variegated, this is what they mean. To show you what it means right here. This is a variegated leaf. It means 2-tone, or sometimes even 3-tone, depending on the variegation. But a lot of times your variegations aren't meant to put out flowers, but as you can see on that one over there, that one's about to put out some blossoms.
Yes.
And hydrangeas almost always are going to be a shade plant. There's a few new varieties that have came out.
Is it full shade or partial shade?
They prefer just about as much shade as you can get them while still getting
full shade.
Right. But a good thing about hydrangeas is they're one of the most popular cut flowers in the world, because they come out looking like big pom-poms. You can kind of see over there, some of them are dying back, but there's that one that's just came out, and so they'll cut that back. There's some more over here.
Yes, the purple ones.
Right. And another cool thing about your hydrangeas is the color of the flower is based on the acidity of the soil. So if you have a really basic soil, it's going to come out one color, to where if you have a really acidic soil, it's going to come out another color.
Well, that poses a question then. So like if one year it comes out one color, and next year you want to try to change the color up, can you change the pH of your soil and achieve that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's basically your litmus test for your landscape. It'll tell you what your pH is, if it's too acidic or if it's too basic for other plants.
But that's really cool because you can change the pH levels really easy in your soil, and get a whole different color the next year.
Right, so same plant, different color. Right here, variegated gingers. Once again, we got that variegated word.
Yep.
These aren't going to do much. They're not a real ginger, neither. They have roots like a ginger, but they're not a true ginger in the scientific form.
Okay.
But people like them because they can, once again, bring color to a shadier landscape.
But let me ask you this, would it do okay in partial sun, partial shade?
Yes.
Okay, so it is one of them that can do full shade or partial sun, partial shade.
Right, and another thing about them is they'll start sending up sprouts way away. So if it sends up a sprout from a shady area into a full sun and then that one grows up, well then that one's going to be able to grow in full sun.
Okay.
But these things, once you plant, are another one that is hard to get rid of. So make sure that it's something you want before you plant it.
And since it does send runners in and out, it's a pretty
Right.
much maintenance plant.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to stay on top of it.
Unless you just want that to fill up an entire area, which sometimes that's what people do.
Okay.
This is actually this is called a tricolor ginger here. And you can see that it's got more than just the two colors. You got the red and then the white and then the green. And it's also a shade plant. Now this one, to where that one can kind of tolerate sun, this one cannot. It will cook very quickly within a matter of days.
So this one must stay in shade
Yes.
all day.
Yes. But a lot of people like the fact that it's got three colors in one.
That is neat.
Tractor seat plants.
What are these?
Things, tractor seat plants.
Tractor seat plants.
Yes.
All right, guys, this is our plant for us right here. Tractor
Yeah.
seat plant, and I see that. It looks like the old Farmall or the old Case tractor seats. That.
And it shows you how big that this can get, and they've had to cut this back plenty of times now. There's been times where it's come out to here. See, these will actually flower. They'll put out a yellow flower.
So it's just not the foliage.
Right. The one probably take back with the tractor seat plant, which there's about 10 different names for it, so I'm not going to get into those, but it tends to be a good place for snakes to bed down.
Shade.
Right, it creates basically a snake house for them where they don't even have to go underneath the ground. So you always want to watch for that.
Okay.
But if snakes isn't a problem where you're at, well then tractor seat plant might be good for
Now,
you.
is this a particularly just a southern zone plants, or how far up can these things?
I'm not sure how far up it can go. I know it can work all through Louisiana.
Okay, and are they full sun?
No, these are going to be another shade plant, partial shade plant. So it can take a little bit of sun, but it prefers more shade than sun. My favorite plant Greengate's ever had. While I was here, I probably sold more of these plants than all other plants combined. This is a frost-proof gardenia here. And the best part about a frost-proof gardenia is as long as you don't overwater it, you can't kill it. Sun can't kill it, full sun can't kill it, drought can't kill it, frost can't kill it. That's the name, frost-proof. So these can go all the way through the United States.
Okay.
Now don't get it confused with the other varieties. There's an August Beauty and a few different varieties of gardenia that are only tropical or subtropical variety gardenias, but these gardenias were meant specifically to be used just about anywhere.
Okay, and being as rugged as yours, kind of you plant it and leave it kind of thing.
Right, but the best thing about gardenias is the flower that they put off. The smell on that flower, in my opinion, beats every other flower that I've ever smelled.
Okay, I got to check that scent out then.
And then these are liriopes here. Liriopes are a very popular border plant. If you look across there, you got the smaller liriopes. They tend to get about this big though, even those over there. And they produce a giant purple shoot that comes out, typically 10 or 12 of them. And it's a very good border plant, especially if you keep it cut back. One of my favorite things about it is the way you chop it back is you just grab it just like that, take your snips, and you can see where they've cut it back in the past.
Yeah.
Take your snips and chop it across, and gets it back to whatever size you want it to. Right, very much like grass. These are the yews. Different than those yews that we saw over there. These yews go straight up. A lot of times they'll get 15, 20 feet tall, and people will use them as a privacy border. So if you've ever seen in the movies, a very popular scene is in one of the Harry Potter movies where they have the big mazes and they're running through them. That's yews that they're using to make those borders of those mazes for them to run through.
So it's not shrubs like I thought it would be more like a shrub. It's actually these.
Right, it's a shrub in that it grows from top to bottom full of leaves. But as far as height, most people wouldn't consider it a shrub.
Okay.
And there's a lot of different varieties. These are all different types of yews here. And back in the old days, yews used to be one of the most popular things they would make bows out of.
Bows?
You hear about yew bows, and like for bows and arrows.
So because they're very flexible.
Right.
And cool. Did not know that neither.
Probably the most popular plant in the world right here, or at least in the United States, is the boxwood. That's just about every type of topiary or hedge that you've seen that's about this tall was probably grown out of a boxwood plant. It's probably the American favorite. Here in the last 15 years or so, they've had a problem. Basically, anytime you put a bunch of plants together in, say, like a neighborhood, and everybody has boxwoods, even though they're spread out amongst the neighborhood, when you're talking about 5,000 boxwoods in the same neighborhood, diseases tend to start spreading quickly throughout the neighborhood. And what this has had is a fire blight issue here as of late. And what that is all these leaves will start turning red. Now here you have sky pencil hollies, which are a very cool plant because they grow straight up and very compacted with one another. And once again, it's one of those plants that when you want to trim it, because they'll get about 7 feet tall, when you want to trim it, you just grab it all together and chop, and it'll start growing out new.
They thicken up, but they thicken up as they get taller.
Right, you can see this one's grows much thicker, and that's actually a really thick one right back there.
Really nice.
And as it gets about 10 feet tall, it can probably be about this thick. A lot of people will put them on like either side of a window, or either side of a door, or either side of the doors and windows the whole way down across the house. You typically want to put it all the way to the back though, wherever you're planting. You want it all the way to the back because it's going to overgrow most everything else.
Okay.
But the good thing is how skinny they stay. They don't take up a ton of room. But
very full.
Right. You can't really see through them like talk about. But one thing is with these hollies in particular, you got your hollies that are self-pollinating and your hollies that need another pollinator holly. These cannot pollinate each other. They need another variety of holly to pollinate. Over here we have the junipers and the cypresses. Cypresses tend to be very hardy. The problem is they have these problems in Louisiana because Louisiana is so humid. Cypresses don't like humidity really, unless it's a bald cypress. Which the reason it's bald is because most of your bark on a cypress tree, that humidity gets underneath it and makes it fall off anyway, which kills the cypress. Bald cypress doesn't have that bark, so there's no humidity that can get underneath it. Okay. So that's our another one of our more popular trees down here.
Yeah, because the bald cypress kind of grows wild.
Right, it'll grow in the swamps and everything.
Yeah, you see it everywhere.
But as for like an Italian cypress, which is a lot like those hollies I showed you over there, they grow real straight up and narrow. If you ever seen the movie Gladiator, or all them Roman movies in ancient Rome, they have a lot of Italian cypresses. Those grow really well in dry areas. You'll be able to find a cypress that'll grow anywhere for you. You just have to find the right one. These are junipers here. Cool fact about junipers is you can make alcohol from them. I forget which one, but I believe it's gin is made from juniper.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Now it's not this one. I believe it's the blue juniper that does it. But these are a real good ground cover. They spread really wide. This is the blue rug here. And these don't even really get much taller than this. They just spread out really wide. To where this juniper will get a little bit of height on it and then just start spreading. But it's a good evergreen plant and very low maintenance. Once again, you can just take a weed eater and trim it to the size you want. You don't even have to get on your hands and knees. These are all salvias. While we're here, I'll just show you the salvias. What these are best for is your hummingbird plants. So any type of trumpet flower,
honeysuckle, stuff like that.
Honeysuckle, stuff like that. If you want to bring hummingbirds into your area, you want a flower like that. Because only a hummingbird can get its beak down in there and get that pollen out. Or get that nectar out. Alright, so now we're in the drift rose section, which Greengate actually plants quite a bit of roses. We'll get to those a little later. But these roses here stay very short to the ground and are a crawling plant. So they just drift all the way across the ground, thus the name. The other thing about drift roses is they bloom almost year round. There's about a 2-month span in winter here where they'll stop blooming, but then after that they come back in full blossom again. You can see on here though that the roses tend to stay a lot smaller than your typical roses, but at the same time you won't find a rose that has 30-40 roses on it at the same time like you will a drift rose.
Yeah, I see some of these got it just full of flowers.
Right, and I mean these are in pots, so imagine what they look like whenever you get them down into the ground. And a ton of different colors on these. You got the apricots, you got the peaches, the corals, the true reds, just a ton of different colors. And then on this side you have the knockout roses, which is almost intermediary between the drift and your traditional rose. And you can see the flower gets a little bit bigger and still quite a bit of flowers on it, but the plant tends to get about 4 foot tall. as compared to these that only get about 1.5 feet, 2 foot tall on big runners. Back here's a bunch of crepe myrtles. Crepe myrtles down here come in all different varieties and sizes. These are dwarf here. And probably the biggest thing down here with crepe myrtles is the fact that they bloom during the summer. So the hottest months of the year, they're out in full bloom. Everything else is struggling to survive like it is in the winter here. So this is a good thing to show because while I was working here a few years back, we would get a lot of questions about what this stuff is. And this isn't just a crepe myrtle problem. This is mostly on basically every tree, especially if there's not a lot of bark, like a bald cypress or something like that. This is called lichen. And what it is it's a fungus. But the thing is a lot of people worry that it's going to kill their tree or something like this, and most likely it's not. The way lichen works is they stick to the side of the tree, and then they suck the moisture out of the air. So they're not actually, they're using the tree more as a home than an actual host. They're not source. Right. They're not a parasite.
Okay. Like moss.
Right. So a lot of people worry. Now there are things, copper fungicide and stuff like that you can spray with them with sometimes good results. Sometimes you don't get no good result at all from it. But at the same time, this isn't causing any damage to the plant. You can see this is meant to be a standard plant. They cut this up to where it looks like this, but it's still got full of growth and stuff like that. The plant's going to survive no matter what with this lichen. And also the lichen actually creates another protective barrier similar to bark on it. So it's kind of symbiotic the way they survive.
All right, so let's talk about some of this stuff in here. So they've got some beautiful plants in here.
Yeah, she keeps it real nice in here. And some of my favorites is right here. You got a snake plant or mother-in-law's tongue. That's two common names. The scientific name is Sansevieria. So, very good indoor plant. They grow straight up so they don't take up a ton of room. If you look over there, there's two taller ones. And getting them like this, it doesn't take very long. You can see all the new ones popping up out of there. They prefer, I believe they prefer to be dry most of the time, like dry out in between waterings. You don't want to keep it wet all the time.
Okay.
Then you have a pretty cool plant here. There's a lot of different varieties of this. This is a bromeliad. And very tropical plant. Grows in the rainforest. A lot of times you'll see palm trees and stuff, and they'll be growing out the side of palm trees in the crevices and cracks. And the coolest thing about this plant is you don't water the soil. You water the cups inside there. And if you can see down in there, I'll shake it a little bit, and you can see the water moving around in there.
Yeah, you guys see that, guys?
That's how it gets its water, not through the soil.
So not through the root system.
Right. So you can almost pull this, and that's why they can live inside of ferns or palm trees and stuff like that, because all they have to do is catch it in that cup and they can water themselves that way.
And is that the same variety over there that's yellow and pink and that?
Yeah,
here?
yeah.
So they got a very...
A lot of different types of bromeliad. This isn't even close. She usually has a lot more, but she usually gets them all in on her spring trucks. So, but yeah, this is a really cool plant. You can see in some of them, like this variety here, that's a really good one to see how it cups the water. Now, since it's not in nature, what you would normally do is you would leave this water in it for about 3 weeks, and then you go pour it out, and then you put more water. And then what that basically does is it gets all the flying debris and stuff out of there, because it ups the salinity in the water, which isn't as good for these plants. So you don't want to build up a salinity in a bromeliad plant, or it'll start to rot away on you.
Okay.
But
now,
as you can see, that one's actually growing pretty tall, so tall that it's wanting to flop over on.
Yeah, I've seen that. And some of these are really tall for these yellow ones.
Right.
Right here. So,
right. Oyster plants, that's a pretty cool one for an indoor plant, just because it's got the purple interior leaf. They don't like a lot of water at all. They'll rot out really quickly. So if you're bad about watering plants or forgetting to water plants, that might be something that you want to grab.
That would be me.
And then I believe this is called a dollar plant. No, it's a palea, but yeah. Chinese money plant. So it's basically a weed. I believe it came from a dollar weed, and they were able to breed it into an actual plant. And that's the thing with most plants. Most plants started as weeds, and we've selectively bred them over time to look like or act like how we wanted them to, and now they're considered plants. That's why a lot of times people will come in and they'll say, is there something I can spray in my landscape that'll kill all the weeds and not kill all my other plants? The answer is no, because most of those plants started out as weeds at one point or another.
And they still have them genetics.
Right. That's one thing you can't change is the genetics.
Now, what is these with these little stalks?
Unless you get 10,000 generations in. These are the Chinese, money trees. So, I believe it's either in China or Japan. These are supposed to bring good luck and bring you fortune if you have it in your house. So, it's a very big tree over there, and a lot of people started asking for them around here. Kung fu movies and stuff like that, you'd see them growing like the bonsai trees and stuff like that, so they became more popular in America.
Okay.
But it's a real cool plant. I actually bought my fiance one a while back. And I like these. These are anthuriums here. And I just like the way they look. It's
I
a
like
very
the way the
leathery
leaf
flower.
grows at an angle on them.
Right, and then you can get them in pink, yellow, and red, I believe. I don't believe I've seen any other colors. But it's just a real easy to take care of plant. It doesn't do much besides what you see, but at the same time it brings color and life to a dim area. And basically everything in here has about the same sun requirements. There's a few different plants that would prefer, like the Sansevierias, I believe they can live in caves.
Okay.
It's kind of crazy because no sun gets in caves.
No, at all.
So, you take a succulent leaf like that, and you literally can just plant it back down into the ground like that. Here's another one here. It's a little busted at the edge, but sometimes you can just rip it off like that, plant it back down into the ground,
And it will take off.
and a new succulent will come up.
So you can just use the leaves.
Right, that's how they breed. Most of your succulents don't flower. Very few of them do, but most of the time, that's what you get. And I believe, let's see, jade plant. So, also called the signature plant, this is one of my favorite indoor plants, because what you can do is, as it gets bigger, you can carve your name or something into this plant, and as the leaf gets bigger, 10, 12 years later, you can come back, if that leaf's still on there, it'll still have your name carved into it, and it'll be all like woody and barked out and stuff like that.
And bigger.
Right, and bigger.
That's neat. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they just were able to get those a while back, and she usually has some bigger ones. I just haven't seen one today.
But this thing, I mean, guys, you couldn't believe it. I mean, the hurricane just, all that's left was a metal here.
Yeah.
That was all that's
they
left.
had to tear this whole place down and start from new.
Everything in it, they lost everything in it, and it was a wreck. It was a disaster. And they've done a really good job of redoing it.
Like over here, you have our fiddle leaf figs, which are in the ficus family. This is your typical indoor office plant. You can get them in small sizes. There's actually even smaller sizes than that, all the way up to like 12 feet tall.
Yeah, and they do very good job of, if you all can see, displaying them.
There's very wealth of knowledge in this place compared to what you find in your box stores.
And guys, let me re-emphasize that. You can come in here and you can tell them what your plants are doing or what you've seen, and you can ask them, and they are more than happy to help you try to figure out what's going on with the plants. Or if you're looking for a specific plant to do it in a specific area, you can tell them the conditions in which you want to grow, and they will point you in the direction of the plants that will do best in that area.
Oh yeah, and the thing is to be totally honest, there's 3 people that's here that I can guarantee knows more about plants than I do.
Yes.
So, one of those 3, they can answer just about any question you can have, as down to scientific, all the way to botany, what's the Latin forms, where did these plants grow, and they can tell you zones of just about everything. There's not much that they can't tell you. You can bring them a single leaf, and they will be able to tell you exactly what's wrong with your plant, exactly what type of plant it came from. As far as plant world, these people are geniuses.
All right, guys, so this is John and Curry from Louisiana Tractor Works and Projects. And like I said, it's a little bit different video, but we wanted to give y'all some more information and insight to plants and that, and go from there. But we will catch y'all on the next one. God bless y'all. Y'all have a great week or weekend, whichever one it is. I post this up.